The Quovexians, he announced, his voice steady as bedrock. An advanced civilization that has been observing humanity for decades. We have had limited diplomatic contact through proxy channels. I laughed at that. I couldn't stop it. The sound escaped me like something wounded trying to get free. Limited diplomatic contact. They had just erased 80,000 people from the universe. The room went silent. I didn't care. I was thinking about Marcus. His last message had arrived 2 days prior. Cheerful and distracted as always. These spores are stubborn little bastards. Remind me of you. Elena. The Quovexians left behind a transmission, their first direct communication with humanity. Our linguist translated it within hours. The words were burned into the inside of my skull long before I ever read them on a printed page, long before I ever spoke them aloud to anyone else. The infection on Kepler-219c has been cauterized. This world falls within Quovexian's sacred space. Your biological contaminants violated an ancient covenant. Let this serve as warning against further desecration. That was what we were to them. An infection. Contaminants. They had claimed Kepler-219c millennia before we arrived, never settled it, never built upon it, never visited it in living memory, but their religion designated it as part of some vast cosmic temple, and we were vermin who had wandered inside the walls. And so they had exterminated us. Precisely, deliberately. They had targeted population centers first, not infrastructure, not military installations, not the defense grid or the power stations or the communication arrays. They had specifically, methodically chosen to eliminate every living human being on that planet before destroying anything else. This was not a misunderstanding. This was extermination. The Emergency Security Council meeting on Earth was everything you'd expect from politicians confronting the possibility of species-level extinction, panicked, posturing, and agonizingly slow. I watched the faces around that polished black table from my lunar feed, cycling through fear, anger, and, my personal favorite, the thinly veiled opportunism of people already calculating how this tragedy might be leveraged into advantage. We need to understand their culture before responding, said Ambassador Wei, straightening his immaculate collar while New Horizons' ashes were still warm in the void. A rush to action could escalate what may yet prove to be a situation open to diplomatic resolution. General Harrington pounded the table hard enough to rattle water glasses 2 seats down. Immediate military response. Full mobilization. We hit back now, and we hit back hard. With what fleet, General? I said from my feet at Luna, and I let the silence sit for a moment before continuing. Our Navy consists of 12 combat-capable vessels. The Quovexians have technology that turned our colony to dust in hours. Full mobilization of everything we have would be swatted aside like insects. The glaze I received through the video link were worth every one of them. Commander Reyes is correct, said Admiral Okafor quietly, and even through the feed his voice carried that quality of absolute, weathered calm that made entire rooms fall silent to listen. Conventional response would be insufficient. However, the obligation of proportional response does not disappear because it is difficult. 80,000 lives demand an answer, and humanity will provide one. That was when Dr. Isabel Nakamura stepped forward. She was a small Japanese woman in a lab coat, wearing it even here, even in this setting, as though she'd forgotten she had other clothes, or simply hadn't cared enough to change. The kind of quietly terrifying brilliance that exists entirely in its own world, that makes soldiers instinctively nervous without being able to articulate exactly why. She carried her tablet in front of her like a shield and activated a holographic display with the calm, measured movements of a person who had been rehearsing this moment in her mind for years and was now simply executing the steps. "There is another option," she said. "Project Prometheus." The room went still in a way that rooms rarely do. Not the restless, fidgeting quiet of people waiting to speak, but the absolute stillness of people who had just heard something that has changed the shape of the air around them. I had never heard a whisper of it, despite my clearance level. What she described over the next 20 minutes involved stellar manipulation, targeted nova induction, and theoretical physics so far beyond conventional science that my mind kept skipping off the edges of the concepts like a stone skimming water. "You've built a star killer," President Alvarez whispered. "We built a deterrent," Nakamura corrected, her voice carrying no heat whatsoever. "One that was never meant to be used. One whose existence was intended to make its use unnecessary. The debate that followed was not a debate so much as a controlled detonation. Half the room demanded another attempt at communication, another round of proxy diplomacy, more transmissions, more patience. The other half was already calculating exchange rates. How many Quovexian lives would constitute proportional response to 80,000 human ones, and whether the math could be made to look like justice from a sufficient distance. Through it all, Admiral Okafor sat in silence and watched Dr. Nakamura's simulations loop on the display. He wore the expression of a man who has already arrived at a destination he did not wish to reach, and is now forcing himself to examine every detail of the place before he admits that he is there. "If we do this," he finally said, and 4 words were enough to silence every voice in the room, "we become something else in the galaxy's eyes, something we cannot become." Ambassador Wei leaned forward. "We send a message that humanity is not to be trifled with." "No." Okafor's voice was quiet and absolute. "We send a message that we are capable of the exact same atrocity that was visited upon us. We tell the watching universe that we learned from the Quovexians, that we took notes." He turned, and his eyes found mine through the video feed with a precision that felt almost physical. "Commander Reyes, you lost someone on New Horizon." I thought of Marcus, of his fungal spores and his laughter and his absolute, unshakable belief that the universe was too vast for the smallness of hatred. "Yes, sir." "Then prepare for deployment. You're my tactical officer for Operation Pyrrhic Victory." The UEES Retribution wasn't merely humanity's most advanced warship. It was our Hail Mary pass, wrapped in titanium and desperation and the prayers of 8 billion people who would never know exactly what was being done in their name. Sleek, black, and silent as a hell breath. Poetic, given its mission, though I was in no mood for poetry when I reported for duty 3 days after the council meeting. Captain Maradallo greeted me at the airlock with a handshake that was firm, controlled, and entirely at odds with the haunted quality living behind her eyes. She was a tall woman who wore authority the way some people wear old, comfortable clothing, naturally, without thinking about it. Right now, underneath the authority, there was something else. Something I recognized because I was carrying it myself. "Wish it were under better circumstances," she said. "So we're really doing this," I replied, because pleasantries felt obscene. "Taking on an alien civilization with one ship." "One ship carrying humanity's darkest creation," she corrected, "plus the finest collection of lunatics, revenge seekers, and people with nothing left to lose that the military could assemble on short notice." She paused. The manifest is illuminating reading. She wasn't wrong. Lieutenant Rivera had lost his entire family on New Horizon. His parents, his younger sister, her husband, their 2 children. He'd requested the assignment 4 times before they approved it, and I suspected he would have found a way aboard regardless. Dr. Williams had lost a research partner of 11 years, a woman she'd worked beside since graduate school, who had been studying alien microbes in one of New Horizon's outlying research stations when the Arrowhead ships came. Sergeant Jackson had received confirmation of his brother's and sister-in-law's deaths 4 hours before our departure, and had shown up to the ship with red eyes and steadier hands than most people manage in their best moments. And then there was Major Kwan. She led the Special Forces contingent, 12 operators whose service files contained more redactions than text, whose eyes had a particular 1,000-yard quality of people who had spent years looking at things that couldn't be unseen. Kwan herself spoke perhaps 10 words during my entire time aboard the Retribution, each one deployed with the economy and precision of a surgeon making an incision. She addressed her team during the initial briefing without preamble, without ceremony, and without anything resembling comfort. "We are humanity's vengeance," she said. "Nothing more, nothing less. Vengeance implies you have a chance of winning. I offered because I couldn't help myself." She looked at me with those flat, unreadable eyes for a long moment. "Winning," she said, "is not the mission." The journey to the Quovexian home system took 17 days in faster-than-light travel. 17 days of drills and planning and simulations, and the particular dark humor that blooms in the space between people who have accepted the odds and decided, collectively, to laugh at them rather than be crushed beneath them. I remember running targeting simulations with Rivera at 2 a.m, ship time, both of us running on cold coffee and the grim momentum of purpose. "If we succeed," I told him, watching trajectories arc across my display, "we'll be remembered as either heroes or monsters. History will have to pick." "Bold of you to assume there will be anyone left to write history," he replied, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I laughed, because what else do you do when you're hurtling through the dark toward the possible end of everything, carrying a weapon that could kill a star? When we arrived at the outer boundary of the Quovexian home system, the reality of what we were attempting struck with a force that no training could have prepared us for. Their system was a fortress. Orbital platforms ringed every major world in overlapping defensive grids of extraordinary sophistication. Patrol fleets moved in complex, interlocking patterns that spoke of centuries of refinement, not the rigid, predictable routes of a young military, but the fluid, adaptive coverage of civilization that had been defending its home against existential threats since before humanity discovered fire. And at the center of it all, their home world turned slowly in the light of its yellow sun. Quovexia Prime, a beautiful blue-white marble cradle by 3 moons, wrapped in the accumulated civilization of billions. Billions of sentient beings going about their lives, entirely unaware that something from the dark between the stars had come to stand at the edge of their world and consider what came next. Just like New Horizon, first contact with their defense forces came 8 hours after our arrival. A patrol vessel detected our engine's signature despite our stealth systems. Either their technology was better than our intelligence suggested, or it simply had bad luck, which in my experience is a more common explanation for disasters. The tension on the bridge became a physical presence, thick enough to press against the skin. "Incoming transmission," our communications officer announced, every syllable controlled with visible effort. "They are requesting identification." Captain Dallow looked at me. "Options, Commander." I pulled up the tactical displays and let the numbers speak for themselves. We are outgunned approximately 50 to 1 if their fleet mobilizes in full. Conventional engagement is suicide. We'd last perhaps 4 minutes. "So much for the element of surprise," Dr. Nakamura murmured from her station, her hands already in motion across calculations that had nothing to do with conventional tactics. Perhaps not entirely lost. Major Kwan's voice came from the rear of the bridge, quiet and certain. During our brief exposure, her sensors had captured something invaluable: communications protocols, fleet positioning data, and most critically, an unsecured data packet from one of the patrol vessels. It was small. It was overlooked. It changed everything. Dr. Williams spent 12 consecutive hours in the lab with that packet, refusing food, refusing rest, refusing conversation. When she finally emerged, the color had left her face entirely, and something else had taken up residence in her eyes. Something I didn't want to name. "You need to see this," she said. "All of you." What the data revealed was a fracture line running through the heart of Quovexian civilization, deep, jagged, and apparently widening. It was not a unified culture that had decided, as one, to exterminate the human colony on New Horizon. It was a hierarchical theocracy divided into 3 major factions, currently in the grip of a religious and political crisis that had been escalating for years. The dominant faction, the Celestial Purifiers, had staged what amounted to a theological coup 3 of our years prior, seizing control of the High Council on a platform of cosmic purity and ancient obligation. They had been watching us since we built the pyramids. "The attack on New Horizon wasn't sanctioned by their full government," William said, her voice carrying the strange, brittle quality of someone reporting a diagnosis they don't want to deliver. "It was ordered specifically by the Purifier leader, High Cleric Vexic Moran. He considers humans cosmic vermin, spiritual contamination spreading across sacred space." She pulled up records of internal protests, dissenting voices, Quovexians who had taken to whatever passed for their streets in outrage at what had been done. There are moderate factions. There is genuine, documented opposition to the attack. Many of them are horrified by what Moran ordered. "Fat lot of good that horror does our dead," Rivera said, and his voice was flat and hard and entirely without cruelty, just the sound of a man stating a fact he has made peace with. I said nothing. I was looking at the display, at the population indicators, the movement data, the ordinary, unremarkable evidence of billions of lives being lived. Parents putting children to sleep. Scientists arguing over data. Artists completing works that no one outside their world would ever see. People who had never heard of New Horizon, who had no knowledge of what had been done in the name of their God, who were simply alive and were about to stop being so because of a decision made by 11 people on a ship they didn't know existed. The universe is too vast for hatred. Elena, Marcus's voice, clear as a bell in a quiet room, as though he were standing beside me. That's what space teaches you, if you're paying attention. Captain, I said, if only one faction is responsible, if this was the act of extremists rather than a civilization, could we target them specifically? The Purifier's stronghold, Vexic Moran himself, the military infrastructure under his command. Captain Dallow's expression was unreadable in the way that only deeply felt things can make a face unreadable. The Nova device doesn't discriminate, Commander. Neither did they, said Major Quan quietly. New Horizon had children. It had infants. The Quovexians didn't ask for moderates and extremists to be sorted before they fired. No one answered that. There was no answer. There was only the weight of it, settling across every person in that room like something physical, like gravity doubled. After 36 hours of debate that fractured the crew-along fault lines we hadn't known existed, Admiral Okafor summoned the entire command staff to the secure briefing room. Dr. Nakamura was already there when we arrived, sitting quietly with a tablet, her hands perfectly still in her lap, her eyes carrying an exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. The Nova device is humanity's darkest achievement, she began, without preamble or softening. It was developed in the aftermath of the Belt Wars as the ultimate deterrent, a weapon so terrible that its mere existence would make its use unnecessary. It was never meant to leave storage. It was never meant to be armed. It was certainly never meant to be here. The lights dimmed. In the center of the room, a holographic projection materialized, a sleek, surprisingly small cylinder, marked with hazard symbols I had never encountered in any classification system I had been trained on. Looking at it was like looking at something that existed slightly outside the normal rules of the physical world. It was almost beautiful, in the cold, precise way that only instruments of perfect destruction can be beautiful. We call it Prometheus, she continued. Precisely regulated omnimatter energetic trigger for hyper-explosive unstable synthesis. Scientists and their acronyms, I said, searching reflexively for something to laugh at, always working to make doomsday sound poetic. Nakamura didn't smile. In all the time I knew her, I never saw her smile when she talked about the device. It isn't a bomb. Not exactly. It is more accurate to call it a catalyst, a key that unlocks a process that the universe then completes on its own. The hologram expanded to reveal the weapon's inner architecture, a quantum field generator built around a chamber of perfect vacuum, surrounded by components whose function I couldn't begin to guess at. It creates a controlled zero-point energy cascade within a stellar corona. In terms a non-physicist can work with, it temporarily suspends certain fundamental laws of physics within a defined radius, allowing matter-to-energy conversion at rates that exceed all normal cosmic parameters. So it's a very fancy bomb, Rivera said. It's a star killer, Captain Dallow said quietly. Nakamura nodded once, without apology. When deployed within a star's corona, it initiates a fusion acceleration chain that cannot be reversed once begun. The star burns through its entire fuel supply in minutes rather than billions of years. It does in moments what time would otherwise require an eternity to accomplish. The hologram shifted to show a simulation. A yellow star, not unlike our own sun, warm and steady and ancient, began to brighten, then to pulse unevenly, then to expand with a speed that felt wrong, felt obscene, felt like watching time itself being broken. The star's outer layers peeled away, then surged outward as a core collapsed and detonated with the accumulated energy of its entire lifespan released in a single, catastrophic moment. The shockwave consumed its planets one by one, a barren rock, an ice giant, then the blue-white marble in the third orbital position. And then there was nothing. Where a solar system had existed, there was only expanding plasma and silence. Someone on the other side of the room whispered, "Jesus." "That's their home world," Rivera said, pointing to the third planet as it vanished into fire. His voice was entirely flat. "Billions of lives." "Billions of lives for 80,000, Major Quan stated, with the tone of someone reading a balance sheet. Disproportionate by any calculation. The sound I made wasn't quite a laugh. That may be the single greatest understatement in the history of human language. There are 11 inhabited worlds in the Quovexian system, Dr. Williams added softly, from somewhere behind me. Population estimates range between 30 and 40 billion sentient beings. The room settled into a silence that had actual mass, that pressed against the chest and made breathing feel like an active effort. Even those of us who had lost everything on New Horizon, even Rivera, even Jackson, even the operators in the back whose faces showed nothing, felt the full, crushing weight of what was being proposed and what it would make us. Can it be modified? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I'd expected. Targeted to affect only part of the system, military installations, the Purifier's strongholds, Vexic Moran himself. Nakamura shook her head, and the movement was so small and so final that it felt like a door closing. The Nova device is binary. Once initiated, the reaction consumes everything within the star's heliosphere without exception. There is no surgical option. There is no partial deployment. There is only all or nothing. This is genocide, Medical Officer Chen said. He had been silent throughout, and now his voice carried the particular quality of someone who has been holding a word in their mouth for a long time and has finally decided to release it. I want us to use that word. I want us to hear it. What we are discussing is a deliberate extermination of an entire civilization. They committed genocide first, Rivera said, and that gives us the right to do the same to beings who had nothing to do with the decision. Chen turned to face him. Most Quovexians have never heard of New Horizon. Most of them didn't choose Vexic Moran. Most of them are, right now, living their lives in complete ignorance of any of this. Most of the people on New Horizon had never heard of the Quovexians either, Rivera replied. That didn't protect them. The argument that followed was not an argument so much as a series of wounds being opened and examined under harsh light. Morality against survival. Justice against the raw, animal imperative of a species that had been struck and now wanted to strike back. The weight of 80,000 names against the weight of 40 billion. None of it resolving. None of it capable of resolution. Through it all, Admiral Okafor sat in silence and watched the simulation loop on the display, the star blooming, the planets burning, the system going dark, over and over and over. He wore the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere terrible and is forcing himself to memorize every detail of it before he takes the final step. We have received new orders, he said at last, and the room stopped. The Security Council has voted 7-3 in favor of deployment. A silence heavier than any that had preceded it. Alternatives were considered in full, he continued, his voice carrying steadily through the weight. Surgical strikes against Purifier Command infrastructure. Targeted operations against High Cleric Vexic Moran specifically. Conventional military engagement across multiple theaters. All were reviewed. All were rejected, judged either insufficient to deter future aggression or impossible given the technological disparity between our forces and theirs. So we're not merely murdering billions to avenge thousands, I said. I had stopped caring how it sounded. We're doing it because it's the only thing we're actually capable of doing. Because it's convenient. Okafor's eyes found mine, and they held something I hadn't expected. Not certainty, not the cold comfort of righteous purpose, but something far more honest than that. Something that looked, in the fluorescent light of the briefing room, almost like grief. We are doing it because humanity cannot afford to appear vulnerable, he said. The galaxy is watching this moment. Commander, every spacefaring civilization within communication range is observing how we respond to the destruction of New Horizon. Every species that has ever considered whether humanity represents an obstacle or an opportunity is waiting to see what we do. If we absorb this without consequence, if 80,000 murdered people produce no answer, we have told the cosmos that we can be struck without cost. He paused. The Security Council has determined that the price of human survival is Quovexian extinction. We become the monsters, I said. We survive, he replied, and then, quietly, with something in his voice that I have never stopped hearing in the years since, those may turn out to be the same thing. Deployment is scheduled for 0600 tomorrow. Captain Dallo will brief on operational specifics. Any personnel with moral objections may register them officially on the record without repercussion of any kind. He looked around the room. I looked around the room. Not a single hand went up. Not even mine. God help us all. Not even mine. Operation Pyrrhic Victory began at 0600 ship time, and it began with a performance. The Retribution emerged from the cover of the outer asteroid belt on a direct course toward Quovexia Prime. Bold, obvious, entirely and deliberately suicidal. Every weapon system online and broadcasting. Every sensor transmitting our position on all known frequencies. Every system on the ship working together to make us look exactly as large and threatening and attention-demanding as possible. A burning match held to the face of a hurricane. The perfect distraction. Because while 16 Quovexian warships turned their beautiful, terrible attention toward us, a stealth shuttle carrying Major Kwan, Dr. Nakamura, and the Nova device was slipping undetected through the outer system on a silent arc toward the yellow star burning at its heart. Quovexian fleet responding. Rivera announced from tactical, his voice carrying controlled flatness of someone who has decided not to feel anything until the mission is complete. 16 vessels breaking orbit. Weapons systems active. Maintain course, Captain Dallo ordered. All available power to forward shields. I watched the shuttle's progress on my display, a tiny point of light moving with agonizing patience toward its target. The plan was simple in the way that only things of absolute, irreversible consequence can be simple. The shuttle would deploy the device in the star's upper corona, then retreat to minimum safe distance. We would have approximately 20 minutes to push the Retribution beyond predicted blast radius before detonation. On the main view screen, the Quovexian fleet spread into attack formation. And even now, even knowing with absolute certainty what they had done to New Horizon, what their High Cleric had ordered, what 80,000 people had experienced in the last moments of their lives, I could not deny that their ships were extraordinary. Organic curve flowing into crystalline structures and configurations that our best engineers hadn't begun to conceptualize. The product of civilization 10,000 years older than ours, turned now toward a single human vessel with what I had to assume was something very close to contempt. They are hailing us, communications reported. Ignore it, Dallo ordered. I almost laughed. Almost. What could you possibly say? We apologize for the intrusion into your home system. Please look at us and not at the other thing. We'll be out of your way shortly. Shuttle report deployment zone reached. Communications announced. Preparing to release the device. In the space between one breath and the next, something happened to time. It didn't slow, exactly. It thickened. Everything continued at normal speed, but registered with an abnormal weight, as though each moment knew it was being permanently recorded. I looked around the bridge at faces set in the particular grim determination of people who have moved past asking whether something is right and are now focused entirely on whether it is survivable. At hands that remained steady on their controls. At people who had lost everything on New Horizon, and people who had lost nothing, and people like me who occupied some terrible middle ground, having lost a friend and an idea of the universe simultaneously. The universe is too vast for hatred. Elena, that's what space teaches you. Device deployed. Shuttle beginning retreat. Quovexian vessels are accelerating. Rivera's voice sharpened. Intercept course for the shuttle. They'll reach it in 3 minutes. The numbers ran themselves before I consciously requested them. The shuttle needs 5 minutes to clear minimum safe distance. 3 minutes is not enough. Captain Dallo didn't hesitate. She didn't pause, didn't look for another option, didn't ask for alternatives. Her decision had been made the moment she accepted command of this mission, and now she simply executed it. Move to intercept. All weapons target lead Quovexian vessels. Make them look at us. For 17 minutes, the Retribution fought a battle it was never designed to win. We weren't built to survive engagement with one Quovexian warship under normal circumstances, let alone 16 in their home system with full tactical advantage. Hull sections breached in 3 places. Our primary shield array failed, then partially restored, then failed again. Rivera took a shrapnel wound to his left side that would have been fatal without immediate intervention, and was treated without breaking stride at his console. We pushed every system past its rated limits and screamed at them silently to hold just a little longer. We lost 4 crew members in those 17 minutes. Their names are on the memorial in Geneva now, alongside the 80,000. I visit them too. When I go, shuttle reports safe distance achieved. The words hit me somewhere between the chest and the throat. All power to engines, Dallo ordered. Get us out of this system. Everything we have. The Retribution disengaged and ran, every system redlining, the ship shuddering with the effort of what we were asking it to do, the Quovexian fleet wheeling in pursuit with a speed that made our own seem like standing still. I watched their ships on the rear display, graceful, even now, even in pursuit, even in what I imagined must have been their version of fury. The blast radius threshold appeared on my display as a distance counter, counting down. I watched it reach 0, and we turned our senses back toward what we had done. It began as a whisper, a subtle disturbance moving across the star's surface, barely distinguishable from the natural turbulence of solar plasma, visible only because we were looking for it and only because we knew exactly what we were looking for. A ripple of wrongness, a wave of something that had no name in the language of normal stellar physics, because normal stellar physics had never encountered what we had just introduced to it. Then the brightening began. It was beautiful. God help me. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, and I have hated myself for thinking that every day since. It was beautiful in the way that only truly terrible things can achieve beauty, the way a storm front looks magnificent from inside a shelter, the way a controlled demolition looks graceful on screen, the way violence has always had an aesthetic that humanity has never fully managed to resist. The star pulsed, brightened, pulsed again, erratically, like a heart losing the thread of its own rhythm. Our science officer called readings in a voice that had descended below a whisper to something barely above the movement of breath. Stellar mass decreasing at rates that violated every model we had. Core collapse imminent. Fusion acceleration beyond all projected parameters, beyond all parameters that had ever been considered, because no parameters had ever been built to accommodate this. Then the star seemed to pause. For one heartbeat, one impossible, elongated, eternal heartbeat. It contracted inward on itself with a violence that should have produced sound but was met only with the absolute, indifferent silence of space. The silence in which all things happen and nothing cares. The silence that was here before us and will be here long after. And then light. Light like the death of a god. Light like the universe clearing its throat. Blinding, consuming, total light that our sensor rays dampened automatically to their maximum protection threshold. And even through that dampening it was almost too much, too present, too vast, too much like something that was not meant to be witnessed. The shockwave expanded outward at a speed that made the concept of speed seem quaint. I watched the first planet vanish, a barren rock, airless and cold, nothing lost there. The second, the third. I watched Quovexian Prime, that beautiful blue-white marble turning in its orbit with no knowledge of what was coming, disappear between one instrument reading and the next. Gone, between one breath and the next. 40 billion lives. 40 billion individual instances of consciousness, people mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-dream, mid-argument, mid-laugh, mid-prayer to gods who had apparently decided that sacred space was worth more than the beings who had built temples to it. Gone. In an instant so fast that it would have been, at least, perfectly painless, completely without warning. One moment existing, and then not, between the space of a heartbeat that never finished. The purifiers who had ordered New Horizons' destruction, the moderates who had protested in the streets, the children who had never heard of Earth, the scientists studying their own stars, the artists, the philosophers, the believers and the doubters and the ones who simply wanted to live and were doing so until they weren't, the orbital platforms, the fleet of beautiful ships, the colony worlds on the system's outer edge, the accumulated weight of a civilization that had endured for millennia, that had watched us build our first cities, had catalogued our species' first stumbling steps out of our cradle, had existed as continuous, breathing, complex culture while we were still learning to write, reduce, in the span of minutes, to an expanding cloud of superheated plasma and hard radiation drifting through the space where solar system used to be. The birthplace of an entire civilization. Cosmic dust. It's done! Captain Dallow said. Her voice was hollow as a bell with the clapper removed. The sound of something that has forgotten how to ring. I wept, not silently, not with dignity, not in the controlled way that officers are supposed to manage their emotions in operational settings. I wept the way that people weep when something breaks inside them that they know, with absolute certainty, will never fully heal. I wept for the 80,000 names on the memorial that I had just avenged in the most monstrous way imaginable, and I was not certain they would have wanted this. I wept for the 40 billion that I had helped erase, who had deserved better than to pay for the sins of their extremists. I wept for Dr. Nakamura, who was sitting at her station with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on nothing, already somewhere else entirely. I wept for Marcus Chen and his fungal spores, and his warm laughter, and his belief that the universe was too vast for the smallness of hatred. I wept because he had been right, and we had proven him wrong anyway. I wept because I would never hear him complain about his samples again, and because in trying to honor his memory, I had done something I knew he would never have forgiven. I wept because we had survived, and I was not sure that was the right outcome. That was 5 years ago. 5 years since humanity declared itself to the galaxy with fire and extinction and the death of a star. The political consequences unfolded almost exactly as Admiral Okafor had predicted, with a precision of man who understood the mathematics of fear better than anyone else in the room. Word spread through interstellar diplomatic channels with remarkable speed. Civilizations that had maintained carefully neutral positions suddenly found warmth for human ambassadors. Trade agreements that had languished in review for years were enthusiastically ratified within months. The 3 known aggressive species that had been probing our outer colony borders quietly recalled their scout ships and redirected them away from human space without a single official communication. Humanity was feared. Mission accomplished. I resigned my commission 6 months after the Retribution returned to Earth. I couldn't stand the medals, the classified commendations, the sealed citations for services rendered in the extraordinary defense of human interests, the handshake from officials who would never say in public what they were thanking me for. Rivera accepted his promotion to Major with quiet, empty eyes. Major Kwan disappeared into a black operations division that doesn't officially exist in any document that can be requested through normal channels. Dr. Isabel Nakamura, who had built the device that killed a star and had spent 17 days aboard a ship preparing to use it, was found dead in her apartment 3 weeks after our return. She had been meticulous, as she was about everything. She left no note. She had, I think, already said everything she needed to say. Captain Dallo now serves as Fleet Admiral of the expanded human navy, which has grown considerably in the 5 years since the galaxy decided we were worth being afraid of. She seems to sleep fine at night. I genuinely cannot determine whether I admire or despise her for that, and I have stopped trying to decide. I visit the New Horizon Memorial in Geneva once a year, on the anniversary of the attack. It is a genuinely beautiful structure, 80,000 names etched into black marble slabs that I illuminated from within by a warm amber light, so that at night, standing at a distance, it looks like a field of stars burning against the void. Poetic, I suppose, in the way that only grief and irony together can achieve. On my most recent visit, I found myself standing in the east wing of the memorial, in the section reserved for the University District casualties, at a time of the evening when the amber light was just beginning to outshine the fading sky. There was an elderly woman nearby, moving slowly along the wall with one hand extended, her fingertips tracing names with the careful, deliberate tenderness of someone reading a language written in Braille. She stopped at one name and stayed there, her finger resting lightly on the carved letters. "My granddaughter," she said softly, catching my stillness from the corner of her eye. She was a botanist, studying native root systems in the Northern Territories. A pause. She was 26. My friend was a microbiologist. I offered, because something about the evening and the amber light and the weight of being in that place made me want to speak. He complained constantly about his fungal samples. Wrote me a message 2 days before it happened, complaining about how stubborn they were. The woman turned to look at me, and something crossed her face, a flicker of genuine amusement, surprised out of her by the image of it. She smiled, an actual, real, unguarded smile. "That sounds exactly like scientists," she said, "always complaining about the work they love too much to stop doing." We stood in silence for a while, 2 strangers joined by nothing except loss and the names carved between us and the amber light making the darkness glow. The memorial hummed softly around us, the sound of other visitors, other hands tracing other names, other silences held in other corners of that enormous dark space. Then she asked me the question, "Were you part of the response team? The ones who—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. I considered, in the space of a breath, all the ways I could answer, all the things I could say, or not say, or deflect around. And then I looked at the wall of names and decided that this place, at least, deserved honesty. I nodded once. She was quiet for a moment. Then she straightened slightly, and something resolute settled into her expression. "Good," she said firmly. "They needed to learn." I have thought about those 2 words every day since. They needed to learn. But what did they learn? Did the civilizations that watch from safe distances and rush to improve diplomatic relations with us, did they learn that humanity deserves to exist, or did they learn simply that we are dangerous enough to leave alone? Did the Quovexian survivors, wherever they are, whoever they are, the ships that were far enough out, the colonies beyond the blast radius, did they learn something from us that Vexic Moran tried to teach them about humans, confirmed now in the most terrible possible way? What did we learn? We learned that we will survive, that the will to continue existing is so deeply embedded in our nature that we will pay prices we cannot fully comprehend to protect it, that we are capable, under sufficient pressure and with sufficient cause, of crossing lines that we once believed defined us, and of crossing them with tears in our eyes, with full knowledge of what we were doing, with grief for both the dead we were avenging and the dead we were creating. The universe is vast and indifferent. It does not keep score. Species rise and fall along its shores like waves, each one burning briefly in the dark, each one convinced of the length of its existence that its light is the most important light there is. We humans, with our wars and our memorials and our terrible, beautiful, infuriating refusal to go quietly, decided that our particular flicker was worth preserving at any cost. Maybe that is the most human thing of all. Not the capacity for vengeance, not the ability to build weapons that can kill stars, but the absolute, bone-deep, almost illogical conviction that we matter, that our existence is non-negotiable, that whatever the universe demands as the price of our survival, we will pay it. We will weep while we pay it, but we will pay. Somewhere in the expanding debris cloud that used to be the Quovexian home system, there are survivors. There must be. Ships that were far enough out, colonies on the edge of their reach, beyond the blast radius. Travelers caught between systems when the star went out. I think about them in the hour before dawn when sleep won't come, when the room is dark and quiet, and there is nothing between me and the full weight of what I helped accomplish. I wonder what they tell their children about us. What name they have given us in their language. Monster stories, almost certainly. The humans who killed a star. I hope, sometimes, that their word for us carries no hatred, only warning. A useful word. A word that keeps things safe. They wouldn't be wrong to use it. The most frightening thing about crossing a line is not the act of crossing. It is not the thing you become on the other side, or the way the world rearranges itself around your new position, or even the faces of the people who watch you cross and say nothing. The most frightening thing is quieter than any of that. It is a moment, usually in the dark, usually alone, usually when you have stopped defending yourself long enough to simply feel the truth of things, when you realize that you would cross it again. That given the same threat pressing in from all sides, the same 80,000 names demanding an answer, the same unbearable choice between monstrous action and possible extinction, you would make the same decision. You would stand in the same briefing room and hear the same arguments and feel the same grief and give the same nod. And you would weep just as much. And it would save just as many people. And it would damn you just as completely. God help us. We survive. Commander Elena Reyes, recorded testimony, Geneva Archives, year 5 after New Horizon. This account is dedicated to the 80,000 souls of New Horizon Colony Kepler 219c, and, in its own way, to the 40 billion who answered for crime they did not commit. May the universe, which keeps no score, remember them both. My name is Commander Elena Reyes, former tactical officer aboard the UEES Retribution, veteran of what the history books now call the Second Contact War, though calling it a war is like calling a supernova a campfire. I'm recording this account because, apparently, future generations need to understand our mistakes. Mistakes. That word lands like a dull blade coming from the bureaucrats who've never been forced to make the kinds of calls we did. The men and women who sat in their climate-controlled offices and sent people like me to the edges of the known universe. They can call it mistakes if it helps them sleep at night. I'll call it what it was. Humanity had been stretching its fingers across the cosmos for nearly a century when everything unraveled, with established colonies on 17 exoplanets, with mining operations spreading across 24 moons and asteroid belts. The politicians called it humanity's greatest achievement. The corporations called it expanding market opportunities. The rest of us, the soldiers, the engineers, the scientists who actually lived and breathed the void between stars, we called it what it truly was, desperate necessity. Earth had been wrung nearly dry. We hadn't gone to the stars out of wonder or ambition or the poetic hunger for discovery that fills the old textbooks. We'd gone because we had no choice. The cradle had become a coffin, and humanity had clawed its way out with bloody fingernails and borrowed time. But New Horizon was different. New Horizon was our pride. It was a third colony established by humanity, but the first that actually felt like somewhere a person would want to live. Located on Kepler 219c, it was a beautiful blue-green marble with gravity at 1.10 standard and a breathable atmosphere that required only minimal terraforming. The colonists had built farms that stretched across rolling plains kissed by an alien sun, universities whose domed rooftops caught the light in ways that made even hardened soldiers stop and stare, 3 major cities whose skylines already flickered with the stubborn, defiant electricity of a civilization putting down roots in foreign soil and daring the universe to pull them up. Governor Lucia Chen had just announced that the population had reached 80,000 souls. I remember laughing when I got that news, thinking of my old friend Dr. Marcus Chen, no relation to the governor, who had grumbled to me about the place getting too crowded when it hit 50,000. Too many humans, he told me during our last video call, leaning back in his cluttered lab chair with that lopsided grin of his, surrounded by specimen jars and stacked data pads. I came to the stars for a bit of quiet. Elena, a bit of peace. And now I can barely hear myself think over all the construction. He'd laugh then, warm, rich, entirely unguarded, and I'd laugh with him across the light minutes between us. The universe is vast, and we've both chosen to fill our small corner of it with something meaningful. He had his spores and his silence. I had my ship and my stars. 80,000 humans on New Horizon. And then, suddenly, none. Turns out we weren't the only ones watching that colony grow. I was stationed at Lunar Command when the first distress signal came through, just finishing up my shift and quietly looking forward to a glass of synthetic whiskey and whatever passed or entertainment in the officers' lounge that evening. The kind of ordinary, unremarkable end to an ordinary, unremarkable day that you never fully appreciate until you understand it was the last one you'd ever have. The communications officer's face drained of all color the moment her headset lit up. She turned to me slowly, as though moving too quickly might make the words more real than she could bear. "Commander Reyes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Priority transmission from New Horizon. They're under attack." The recording was fragmented, corrupted by what we would later identify as some form of quantum interference technology so advanced our engineers spent months just trying to understand its basic principles. Governor Chen's face filled the screen. A face I had seen in a dozen press briefings, always composed, always measured, always a picture of steady, reassuring authority. Now she looked like a woman who had stared directly into the face of death itself. Which, of course, she had. Unknown vessels, atmospheric entry, energy weapons unlike anything we've ever. Her voice fractured. She looked at something off camera, and whatever she saw carved years from her face in an instant. Oh God! They are targeting the residential sectors first. Static, screaming, silence. You want to know what's worse than hearing 80,000 people die? It's hearing the moment when thousands of voices become hundreds, when hundreds become dozens, when dozens become one small, terrified, isolated voice crying out into equipment that is already failing. And when that final voice fades into absolute nothing, the silence that follows is so total, so consuming, that it feels like the universe itself has held its breath and decided not to release it. By the time the Security Council assembled, we had satellite imagery. I use the word imagery generously. It was more like abstract art rendered in fire and rubble. The colony's defense grid hadn't slowed them down for even a moment. 7 ships, sleek as obsidian arrowheads cutting through atmosphere, had methodically and deliberately reduced New Horizon to ash and memory. Every residential sector, every university, every farm, every street where children had learned to ride bicycles under an alien sky. Admiral Victor Okafor stood at the head of the council room, a silver-haired black man whose eyes carried a particular worn quality of someone who has seen too much across too many years and made peace with none of it. He was the only person in that chamber who appeared neither panicked nor performing grief for the cameras.